Leadership is a very lonely place. And one of the reasons why it's hard to own your mistakes is because you develop this idea if you own your mistakes, you're going to lose credibility, when actually the opposite is true. My dad, he gave me this gift that became a mantra, and it has a connection to this connection of being a bridge builder. He said, remember, it takes just one pivot to change the momentum of the game.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today's episode is all about the art of communication and the role of leaders as bridge builders. In an increasingly complex and divided world, leaders who can unite people, resolve conflicts, and foster trust are more valuable than ever. I'm truly delighted to have Dr. Maria Keckler with us. Dr. Keckler is an international award-winning educator, leader, and research scientist at San Diego State University. Her work bridges story science, empathy, technology, and entrepreneurship to drive innovation in healthcare. Dr. Keckler is a renowned communication strategist and the author of Bridge Builders, The Art of Building Trust and Connection in a Distracted World, a book I found particularly insightful, landing it in the top 20% of the hundreds of leadership books I've read. She's worked with leaders in corporate, nonprofit, and government sectors, helping them foster collaboration and unlock the power of connection. In this episode, Dr. Keckler will share the secrets behind being a bridge builder, discuss the role of communication in leadership, and reveal actionable steps to help you excel as a leader. Stick around, it's an episode you won't want to miss. Dr. Keckler, welcome to the Science of Leadership, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tom, and please do call me Maria.
Yes, ma'am, will do. So let's get right to the conversation. You often emphasize the importance of leaders being bridge builders. Obviously, that's the title of your book. What does it mean to be a bridge builder?
Well, let me preface by saying that the whole idea of being a bridge builder, I think it creates a mental metaphor for us immediately. What does it mean to build a bridge to somebody's mind, to somebody's heart? It is a mindset. It's really an identity that I have tried to promote with the people that I work with. But also, I often talk about how we are inherently wired to be bridge builders. Here's an example. Are you married, Tom?
I am, yes.
So somehow you build a bridge and you sold the deed,
Miraculously.
right? Our kids, I don't know if you have kids, but our kids are a perfect example. They will wear you down until they get what they want. And so I think that we are inherently built to really get what we want by being persuasive, by, building connection. And somehow I think it gets beat out of us because we begin to really buy into this idea that I need to get to where I need to go by being first, by being the one that gets the attention. I need to prove myself. And so there's a number of narratives that I think that we buy into that it's all about us. It's about my message, it's about my purpose, my goals, my career. And we forget that we actually are meant to connect.
Yeah, that's a powerful, as you say, mental metaphor, this idea of the bridge and connecting. And you're right. So often I think we just get caught up in us and our story. My son and I talk a lot about he's the main character. He likes to tell everybody, I'm the main character in this story, right? And we do that jokingly, but the reality is a lot of times we do actually behave that way. We think that way, and that, as you're alluding, I think erodes those connections, erodes those bridges to other people. And it's when we take our mind out of that state and move toward something else. It's not about me. It's something bigger, perhaps, that bridge building can occur in a more powerful way.
And we forget really that as leaders, in order for us to get what we want, we actually need the people that are supposed to follow us, that want to follow us. But, and you probably have seen this, you have, a lot of people on your podcast, experts that have identified that oftentimes the person that is wearing the title of leader is not the leader.
Right. Right.
And so I had a mentor once, and we were talking about our ability to show up to any room. And oftentimes you will be the only leader in the room, whether you are the most senior person in the room. And that is because of how you conduct yourself, how you carry yourself, how you communicate. And so I think that oftentimes we forget that the investments we make into our communication will set you apart. And you don't need a title to really command a room, to make things happen, to have influence.
Right. 100% correct. Leadership position does not equal leadership. So, yeah. And this is all helpful in helping us to start thinking about what does it mean to be bridge builders and what could that look like? I was wondering, can you share a story that really shows what it looks like for someone to be a bridge builder?
Yeah, no. And I'm going to actually first tell you a story that it seems that is not connected to, excuse me, the leadership that we are traditionally looking to have. But it goes back to when I was growing up in Mexico City. And my dad taught me how to play chess very early in life. So I was about 6 years old. Just about every afternoon after dinner, he would go and pull the old wooden chessboard. He set up the chess pieces and we would play. My dad would not just let me win, never. And so, needless to say, I was losing quite a bit. And I also found out how competitive I was. And so immediately I wanted to quit. I was done. After a couple of games, I couldn't win. And so as soon as I began to see my pieces disappear, I just wanted to walk away. My dad, he would say, let me show you something. And he would pull me back to my chair, and then he would reach over and he would move a piece. And just like that, I was back in the game. And he gave me this gift that became a mantra, and it has a connection to this connection of being a bridge builder. He said, remember, it takes just one pivot to change the momentum of the game. And so in that case, here you have my dad who could have given me, a pep talk about not being a quitter, about sticking it out, about working hard, about how failure can help. I mean, all the things that he could have said. But instead, he really connected with me by showing me how one move can change everything. And that just connected with my heart, connected with my mind. And so when I have worked with leaders, oftentimes there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of trying to correct errors or highlight failure. I was working once with a leader who had the habit of constantly spending quite a bit of time talking about the errors made, when things didn't go right, when a communication maybe didn't go out on time. And it just deflated the team constantly. And so that is just an example of how you can shift the way that you talk to people, the way that you approach them, so that the defenses come down, where we begin to build trust and people will react completely differently, right? People want to win. People want to be given the opportunity to try, but it is just a little tweak of how and how someone can communicate that.
Yeah. That reminds me of something that one of the four-star generals mentioned to me when I was interviewing him for my study. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, wow, I can't wait to screw it up today.
Yes.
Everybody gets up and everybody really is wanting to do their best, whatever they're engaged in. And we have an opportunity to help them reach that or to prevent them from getting there as leaders. And we think that we're always trying to help them get there, but so often I think we don't. We stand in the way. We we inhibit them. We speak ill of their attempts, thinking that we're trying to help, but we hurt probably
Yeah.
more than we
Yeah.
help.
There was a leader I was working with many years ago, and he would be so amazing in validating both his customer and also his team. And so he would have, let's say, a customer come and say, I didn't get the service I wanted, or I didn't get, I was told I was going to get an email by this time and I didn't get it. And so we have all seen leaders who immediately go to their employee, what happened? Why didn't you do this? You said you would do it. And it just begins to really squelch their spirit. And then they begin to make more mistakes after that. So he instead would talk to the customer and say, thank you so much for letting me know. I can guarantee you that something must have happened because this employee is always on target, always on time, prides himself in communicating on a timely basis. So I will make sure I will talk to this person. So validating, but also at the same time, uplifting that
Hmm.
employee by not ruining the reputation, right?
Yeah.
And so then he would go to the employee and again assuming positive intentions, which is something I talk about all the time.
Hmm.
You assume positive intentions. Is like, hey, I heard this, let me know, how can I help? Something happened, you are always so good at what you do. And it just changed the way that his employees really reacted to failure. It was not like this catastrophe, but it was an opportunity to learn and to talk about how we can support one another.
Yeah. That idea of assuming positive intent, we have a we have a Collins family values that hangs on the wall, and we all, so there are four of us, my wife and two kids, and a few years ago we put together what are our family values, and one of them is assume positive intent. We don't always do that, but that's absolutely something that we're striving to do because, as you say, it changes the whole dynamic, the whole conversation
Yeah.
when we assume that, hey, this person generally is, maybe it's theory X versus theory Y, right? Where it's a theory Y sort of mindset where we're thinking, okay, people want to do well. They want to, so assuming that positive intent, I think can make such a great impact on people and organizations as you're kind of describing.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
As you were talking, I was struck by how often I've seen folks in administrative roles, leadership positions, whatever it may be, when those moments come, when the customer or whomever it is comes and complains, they, instead of owning it as the person in charge, say, hey, we made a mistake, or that's on me, or whatever it is, they pass the blame to somebody else, somewhere else in the organization. And then, as you say, they go and they say, hey, look, that was a problem. You need to fix it or whatever. And I think it always returns. Like people always know that the leader, quote unquote, behaved that way. And the erosion of trust and respect and all that comes with that is just tremendous.
Oh, 100%. I think if we begin to think about our communication, either we are building a bridge or we're burning a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
There's no much more than that, right? Because if I am building a bridge, I'm building trust, I'm building connection, I am building rapport. On the flip side, I am just letting it erode, right? Maybe I'm not completely throwing a bomb, but I am really not increasing my likelihood that I am going to connect with you. I have always been so surprised how people are so willing to overlook mistakes, for example, when you are willing to, like you said, own your mistakes and do it quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not be not be resentful about it, but really do it from an authentic place. I love Kim Blanchard,
Mm-hmm.
who always talked about, feedback is the breakfast of champions, right? And I think that one of the things that we can do as leaders is provide opportunities for feedback, because we always have blind spots. And so, for instance, one of the benefits I think of having been a executive coach is that leadership is a very lonely place. And one of the reasons why it's hard to own your mistakes is because you develop this idea that if you own your mistakes, you're going to lose credibility. When actually the opposite is true. But sometimes we not even know that we're doing that. We have this blind spot and we not even see what other people see. And so having mechanisms or people that you trust that have nothing to gain or lose by telling you the truth is the first step to becoming a great leader.
Mhm.
I've seen people that start as managers and they are elevated to senior leadership. And all of a sudden, you see a shift in their approach, even because then your weaknesses or the cracks in your character begin to be magnified at that
Mhm.
level. And so it is so important that it's not just own your mistakes, but oftentimes you don't even know what those mistakes are, so it's hard to own them. So
Mhm.
having a circle of trusted advisors, people that can give you the truth, is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Sort of blind spot spotters, if you will, the people that will point
Yeah.
out to us, "Hey, I see this going on. Maybe you're not noticing it." I remember that reminds me of when I was in medical school. So I was a third year medical student and I was doing my surgery rotation. And back then, nobody cared about hours, how many hours you worked, or what. Well, I was going to say you didn't. They actually did care about how many you didn't work. They didn't care how many you did work. They wanted you to be at the hospital all the time. And so when I was doing my surgery rotation, I stayed at the hospital most of the 2 months that I was doing that rotation. I spent a lot of nights that I wasn't on call in the call room. And actually, they would page me, even though I wasn't on call, because they knew I would answer a lot of times. And so I was just working like crazy. And my friend, Dan, close friend of mine, he was in my wedding and everything. He came to me and he said, "Hey, smoothing out the verbiage, you're really being a jerk lately." Because I was just so overworked and so spent, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, that I was being a jerk. I was being short with people. I was not being the person I wanted to be, but I didn't recognize it because I didn't have the mental energy to think about it. It was just
Mhm.
how to keep going, how to meet this demand or do that thing or whatever. And Dan said, "Hey, this isn't you, man." And so he absolutely helped me to see that. And change course and improve the situation. But that's an example, absolutely, where having that blind spotter was really important to me in that experience.
No, 100%. It's hard though, to find those people, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, there's a sense of competition. So your peers sometimes, well, everybody's keeping appearances. Everybody wants to show up as if they have it all together. And so having those external people that can truly, or like you had a friend,
Mhm.
he couldn't lose anything, right? You were not controlling his paycheck. You were not controlling his promotions. And so we need to find those people that can help us identify when we are not showing up as the people that we actually want to be.
Mhm.
That is, one of the biggest things in terms of being a bridge builder. I know leaders who, in their value system, they want to be kind, they want to be empathetic, they want to be great leaders, and then they don't show up as that. Sometimes it doesn't show up in a particular segment of their communication. So, for instance, there's a leader that I can think of who is absolutely kind and lovely if you are face to face with this individual. Then you get emails, and this person just shows up as a bully, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, in talking to some of the employees, they just felt almost psychologically abused because they would read this email. It was so abusive or so short or so just, I mean, mean.
Mhm.
And they were ready to just complain, and then this person would show up in just as a completely different person. So they had this cognitive dissonance
Right.
where they were so upset at this email communication, but yet when they were in front of this person, they couldn't say anything because this person acted in a completely different way. And so those kind of disconnects,
Mhm.
sometimes we don't even realize that are happening, and so we need to look at what is causing that. In your case, you're talking about stress and burnout. We need to have those conversations.
Yeah. This idea of the inconsistency in the way we behave, right? People can't trust who's going to show up. Is it going to be mean email Tom? Is it going to be friendly in person Tom? Is it going to be something else? And that absolutely erodes those relationships. And that's what we're talking about with bridge building, I think, right? Is building that bridge of relationship so that we can work well together. And when we erode that trust, that just undermines the whole foundation, the
Yeah.
pillars of it. Well, in your book, Bridge Builders, you talked about these three types of appeals that people make to others. And so those were ethical appeals, emotional appeals, and logical appeals. For our listeners, could you kind of expand on those a little bit and then tell us how they work with regard to this concept of bridge building?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This really comes down to, Greek rhetoric, right? So we know ethos, pathos, logos. But the idea is that we inherently or subconsciously are constantly trying to validate what we hear according to these three different appeals. So when you are, let's say, presenting an idea, or you are a speaker on a stage, as an audience member, I am subconsciously, this happens very, very quickly in the brain. I am subconsciously trying to see if you're credible. I'm trying to see, I'm trying to figure out if, the ethical appeal, is this person credible? So understanding your credentials help. Oh, okay, he is a physician. Okay, so that tells me something about you, right? That you have the ability to consistently build towards a goal, that you have worked very hard, that you have work ethic. And so credentials have an important part in building that credibility. And so one of the things that I often talk about to people that, let's say, introduce you as you come on stage,
Mhm.
don't minimize that introduction, because you are actually making it easier for that speaker to build trust with the audience. Because once they have that introduction, and you did that so well, and it's always hard, right, to hear all the accolades and the
Sure.
bios, but it is important, because once you get that out of the way, people is like, okay, so this person knows what she or he is talking about, and they kind of relax, their brain kind of relaxes in that area. And then so then you move into a logical appeal. Is the information organized? Can I understand it?
Mhm.
Right. and
Yeah.
and so when you are preparing a presentation, we oftentimes focus so much on the content, but not in the organization and how it's delivered. You want people to understand what you're saying, right? And also, are the sources, something that I can trust? All those kind of logical, items. And then, the pathos or the emotional appeal, at the core, we make decisions with, not necessarily with our,
Sure.
logical brain, but really our emotional self, right? So
Mhm.
when I remember when you reached out to me, because we all get multiple emails,
Sure.
requests, can you do this? And you reached out, and I didn't know you. And so first of all, I'm like, who is this person? Right. So,
Sure.
and so I went, and I think I looked you up on LinkedIn or something, and I'm thinking, okay, who, what is the background? What is the credential? So I'm talking about that ethical appeal. And then you explained, why you wanted to interview me. You had read my book, which was really great, because now you build a connection. You know who I am. You've taken the time to read my book. And then the emotional piece is, I think it kind of touched kind of that sense of pride, that ego, right? It's like, oh, he
Mm.
wants to talk to me. And so I think we all do that. We all want to we all want to say yes at the end of the day. We want to say yes, and we have that instinct to say yes from an emotional standpoint. And then we justify that decision based on the other two appeals,
Yeah.
the logical and the ethical appeal. And so as we communicate with others, having credibility is important. Being clear
Hmm.
and organized is important. And the other piece is connecting at an emotional level. And that actually brings me to some of the research that I'm super excited, which is really, how we do that through the power of story.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I'd love to
story
hear about that.
So the stories are absolutely key in how you build this emotional appeal with people, and a lot of it. And I love that you're a physician because you will understand this, right? We have a problem of declining empathy in the world. The longer that you are in your medical education or nursing education, actually you join, you apply to be in medical school because you care, you want
Hmm.
to help people, you want to change the world. And then by the time we graduate you have less empathy than you started with, which is
Yeah.
tragic.
Yeah.
Then you go and work and you have systems where empathy looks like inefficiency.
Right.
You don't have time to listen to your patients. You are out of joint with your values, which is to care for people because you have to move through them. And so we completely lose the ability to really connect with the other person. And so what we're doing in my research work is looking at the power of storytelling. How do we reignite our empathy and our ability to connect with others through the power of story? And so we bring in patient stories
Hmm.
that put you in the place of the patient, because at the end of the day, all of us will be patients or have been patients or know someone we love who will be in that seat. And so it's really exciting. So when you look at the neuroscience of storytelling, for example, we know that when we tell stories, so when I was telling you the story of my dad, I
Yeah.
mean, I could see smile. And
Hmm.
so if we had scans of our brain right now, you would see that they're lighting up in the same places, right?
Yeah.
And that there's this mirror neurons
Hmm.
where we are actually relating to one another. You're probably having just maybe a thought about maybe your relationship with one of your parents comes up, and a story of your own kind of triggers. And so we have all this neural activity and this amazing
Yeah.
chemistry going on in our brains. And what we've seen is that one of the things that happens is that oxytocin is released. And
Hmm.
oxytocin, for those who haven't been talking about this much, it's what allows us to build connection, right? It's it actually we've seen it in actually one of my mentors. That's his primary work is in how oxytocin actually is the connector to empathy and connection.
Hmm.
And so when we're talking about communication and you want to connect with people at that emotional level before you even get to the data, to the logic, to the all of that, learning to tell stories and building almost a portfolio of your core stories. In the book, I called it, building your collection of stories as your bridge builder manifesto. Those stories are like the one I told. They don't have to all be about your leadership journey where you are today. But for me, that core story I just told you about my dad and the chess, that has become a core story that has guided even my research work, my leadership, my
Hmm.
mentorship of others. And we
Yeah.
all have those stories.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so powerful, this idea of story. And I think that there's so many questions I want to ask you. Do you think, having grown up in Mexico, in Mexican culture, do you think that augmented, because so many in the United States, mostly in Western, these intensely Western environments, people tend they shun story. I'm from Appalachia, and we're storytellers, and but a lot of people, they don't seem to have, they've suppressed that or something, largely in our culture. And so all my friends who are from Latin American countries, and also from Caribbean nations and from African countries, and story is, I mean, it's human, right? Like, we're not made to know the numbers on a spreadsheet. We're made to know story, and we tell story. And from the furthest back in human history, it was oral history. People recited, like, the early Jews, they would gather around campfires and they would recite what became the Old Testament. And if somebody got a word wrong, they would be corrected. And so it was maintained through oral history and story. And so I was just wondering, as you're telling this really great story about your dad, do you think your cultural experience really helped you to be more of a masterful storyteller?
I mean, I think I agree with you that there are some cultures that I think embrace and value the storytelling, right? So it is true. I would argue, though, that I think, again, we are inherently wired to tell
Sure.
stories. And
Hmm.
again, I'm sure that there's a study out there. I don't have it in front of me, but I could speak, we could just look at the evidence, right? Look at little kids. They
Hmm.
are, something happens at school, at the playground. Dad, let me tell you what Johnny
Right.
did, and I did this, and then there's like, and they go on and on and on. We are inherently built to tell stories. I mean, if
Hmm.
somebody cuts you off, on the way to work, you just tell that story. And so we are actually wired to tell stories. We enjoy telling stories to one another. But I do agree with you that it has somehow been devalued. I don't know exactly when it happens, but I'll tell you, I spent about maybe 8 years working and developing speakers, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and I would work with a lot of scientists, especially in the pharma industry or life sciences. And one of the things that was really interesting is, first of all, before we could even start any kind of training or coaching, is we had to really convince them that by them telling a story, or even that using the language, let's tell the story of your data, let's
Hmm.
tell the story of your innovation, that they had this fear that if they did that, it was going to dumb down their science. It was going to make them appear less credible. And so, first of all, we had to get through that misconception.
Yeah.
I have a great story. I was actually asked by a peer, at San Diego State University, we have a number of faculty that were asked to come. They call them equity, faculty of equity or something like that. Basically, what it was is a number of scholars across the disciplines in STEM, in this, social sciences,
Hmm.
they that had some kind of innovation or work related to how to create more equity in some field. And they were asked to come to this event and to basically talk about the research and why it was important to have these initiatives. And so colleague had read my book and he said, "Hey, would you mind working with them to help them develop their presentations?" And I will never forget. This was one of my favorite sessions. This particular faculty member, he is a brilliant mathematician, and he had developed this entire software to be able to be used in classrooms and to help you as a faculty member really get a picture of your implicit bias as you were teaching. So you were able to measure the people that you called on, the people that you didn't call on. It was
Hmm.
fascinating. And so what is your instinct when you're doing that presentation? You want to go right to the science. You want to talk about the innovation, right? So I said, okay, so let me ask you a question. What do you think the elephant in the room is? How are you going to build trust? Because you're coming to talk about equity and you're going to talk about these subjects, right? And both of us knew. He says, well, I think the elephant in the room is that I'm a white guy, right?
Mhm.
And how do I know anything about equity and bias and all that? Because I have all the privilege in the world, right? And so I go, yes. I mean, people are going to be asking, why do you have to tell me? You don't even know what my experience has been. And so I asked him, so frankly, I actually want to know what led you to develop this technology. And he just said the most moving story, how his wife and his child, who are from a different culture, he has seen firsthand how they have been treated.
Mhm.
And it was just a wake up call, because he grew up in just a predominantly white Christian environment, and he never even had a lexicon to talk about these type of differences. And when he went to school, he began to see some of those differences, but he still didn't quite understand until he ended up experiencing it with the people he loved the most. And so that led him to begin to develop that. And so I said to him, you have to tell that story. You
Yeah.
have to. And he was so nervous. He says, I don't want to do that. I don't know. I think it's going to be too touchy feely. I'm not going to have credibility. And that's always the fear that we have. People are not going to believe that I am smart enough, that
Mhm.
I am scientific enough. And so I said, well, would you trust me? What is the worst thing that can happen? And so we talked about that, and he decided, I'm going to do it. And so we practiced it. We make sure that it was just, and again, you don't have to overindulge in a story.
Yeah.
A well-crafted, well-prepared story should take, I don't know, a minute, right? And
Yeah.
so he did. And I said, that's just 1 minute of your 20-minute presentation. And so he delivered that, and he got the best response. People came back to him, and it just changed the trajectory of his entire work, because people began to see that he was in it for a very personal reason.
Yeah.
And so that to me is just such a great reminder that all of us have the opportunity to take a risk and share the type of story that will serve the audience. It's not an indulgent story. I am doing it in service of you understanding where I'm coming from. And I am doing it so that we can build connection and we can actually have a bridge.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That is a great example of, and there's so many folks in STEM fields who do get rid of the story, it seems like. And so being able to bring that back in, I think is so valuable. That's part of what I try to do with this podcast. I always try to ask my guests, and I try to share stories that I find applicable for my own experience. But you know, my guests to say, "Hey, can you share a story that demonstrates that?"
I don't know if you have noticed this or agree, but the most powerful stories that we can tell in different circumstances, we almost have forgotten about them, or we have minimized them. And so there's an exercise that I love doing, especially, with executives who oftentimes really don't allow themselves to tell stories. And we just really go through this exercise where we just, create a timeline of their stories, the peaks and valleys, the
Hmm.
pivots, and just to begin to remember the critical stories that have influenced their leadership. Some stories have negatively influenced their leadership, and just becoming aware of what is informing a behavior that you don't want is incredibly helpful. So it's almost like getting a PhD on looking at the data of your
Mhm.
storyline and being more intentional about using some of those stories in positive ways, and then becoming aware how some of those stories negatively impact the behavior that is showing up in your leadership.
Yeah. I think those exercises are valuable. There's so many stories that we have that we don't even recognize. The story I told earlier about my friend Dan, I hadn't thought about that in a decade, probably, maybe more. I don't know, a long time, but just there was something that spurred that into my memory as you were saying. The mirror neurons were taking place, were firing, and were resonating on the same literally brain wavelength in that moment, and it brought forth this story of my own. And so I think taking the time, how valuable is that, to take the time to sit down and to say, what are the stories, my story, if you will, of these different things, how valuable that is. This is usually where I kind of go into a little discussion about, the scientific studies have been done that support the importance of whatever topic we're discussing. But you've done so much work in this area. You've shared some of your research a little bit. But are there other things from your research or from the science in general that you think be valuable to discuss with regard to this idea of bridge building?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and I'm happy to send you some resources. I think understanding the power of even reflective dialogue. So some of the studies that I'm doing right now, it's based on the concept of using story, but also reflective dialogue. And so, I'll give you an example, and I'll make an application, for
Yeah.
leaders. So we, take, a number of nursing students, for example, and we show them a 5-minute patient story that
Mm.
is a real story. And so this is the concept here is, how do we help nourish their empathy? Help them preserve empathy, right? And so there's a lot of discussion about what do we do to bring empathy into the classroom, because traditionally the reason empathy declines in medical education is because we focus on the technical and clinical aspects of medicine, right?
Hmm.
And we exclude the soft skills, which is communication, is really listening,
Right.
cultural competence, all those different things. And so what do we do now that we know that? And actually accreditation agencies are demanding that these programs, not only graduate students or, professionals who have these hard skills, the clinical skills, but also the soft skills. So the instinct would be, well, let's just add a class on empathy, right? Well, that does not work, because number one, empathy or communication, soft skills really leaks, and we have to
Mm.
constantly replenish them, right? Why does this leak? Because, like you said, stress, the conditions of the system that we work in, preconceptions, whatever. And so what we are testing, and we're very excited, is that you don't have to have a didactic class necessarily on empathy, on the soft skills, on communication. We inherently know that those are good things, right? You inherently, I mean, we teach it to our kids.
Hmm.
We are very indignant if somebody doesn't do that to us, right? That's how we know we know.
Right.
Is that if you talk to me in a particular way, I am going to be indignant. So I know that that is not the way to communicate, but yet we don't do it when we talk to somebody. And so what we do is we show this story, but then instead of giving you instruction on how to do it, we have a dialogue with some key discussion questions. And do you know that every single student they're having this aha moments? They actually remember it because they are actually pulling from the wealth of their own experience, of their own value systems. And so I really think that as leaders, we need to dedicate opportunities for us to talk about these things.
Hmm.
We don't often need just a class. Let's
Yeah.
have facilitated discussions where we talk about what are our values. What is the person that I really want to be when I show up to lead my team? What is that ideal person? And so for me, when I was writing Bridge Builders, I felt that, for me as an immigrant who had to learn English before I could do anything in this country, It's like, what is my one move? What is the best move, the pivot that could change the momentum of the game for my life? And
Mhm.
so what I noticed is that the people that were able to connect with others were the ones that got the job opportunities, that were tapped for promotions. And I wanted to be that. And so I made it my conscious decision. I want to be a bridge builder. I want to be someone that gives others the benefit of the doubt, that brings the best in others, that forgives, that does all these different things that make others feel valued. And so that became my identity, if you will. And so I would say that that's what I'm seeing with these students, that the more that they have these interactions, and even with leadership groups that I
Mhm.
facilitated, they actually remember that's who I want to be. That's who I can be. And to me, I think that that is amazing. And there's a whole body of research that supports why that works. Transformational learning is one theory that we're working with that is all about how you use these facilitated conversations that
Mhm.
help you transform the way you behave.
That's great stuff, and so inspiring, really. As you were talking, I just was thinking, who doesn't want to be that kind of person? Don't we all on some level want? I mean, maybe I'm ridiculous, but I think most people, they're pathologic people, right? But most people want to be that kind of person that you're describing. They want to show up in that way. They want people to like them, to be glad they're present, and to have meaningful connections. And what I hear you describing is a way that you're working on to help people to achieve that in their lives. And so I think that's really exciting. Do we need it in medicine? Absolutely. Do we need it in society in general? The fact that I even raised that question, obviously we do. We're in a difficult time. And so I think if everybody had more of that, we'd be so much better off. Now that we know kind of what it means to be a bridge builder, why it's valuable and important, crucial even for leadership and our success, do you have, maybe drawn from this work that you've been doing, but a set of practical tips that you give our listeners and me, so that we can do this better?
Yeah, I think being curious in your interactions is critical because immediately makes you a better listener, right? But there is a tool, and you'll find it in a book, or I can send you a printout so you can give it to your listeners. I remember when I was talking about listening. My grandfather was Chinese, and so I'm always fascinated by the Chinese culture. And so I had been talking to a colleague, and she was telling me that growing up, she learned that there's this ancient symbol for the word listen, to listen. And when you look at that ancient symbol, it's made up of five other symbols, and one of them is the ears, the eyes, the mind, the heart, and then king. And so she said the way that I learned it is that when that listening means you listen with your eyes, with your ears, with your mind, with your heart, as if you are in the presence of a king. And so with great reverence and respect. And so to me, that is just such a beautiful way that we can think about how we listen to the people that we lead, for example. How do we listen to each other? That is not just about hearing and then moving on, but really, am I giving them my full attention? And am I being present?
Mhm.
I am opening my heart to the possibility that what they're saying is true, that what they're saying is heartfelt and authentic. And then do I do it in a way that they feel honored and heard as well? And so that to me, if we can all practice that, I think that a lot of our problems could be solved because everything hinges on that. It becomes almost like this this habit that triggers that knocks off the rest of the dominoes, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I would leave your listeners with. I work at it. I'm not perfect either because we're human, and so believe me, I when I say this, I am preaching to myself.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I really, having studied several ancient Chinese writings, I really appreciate you bringing that in and sharing the story and the history of that concept. That's really, I'm gonna have to dig into that because it's powerful, it's concise, it's easy to carry with us, and so I really appreciate that. I was reminded of General Jim Mattis told me, listen with the willingness to be persuaded. And it's in the same sort of vein, right? It's this mindset of, I have a belief or an idea that I'm holding, but I'm only holding it, I'm holding with open hand, in the sense that I'm ready to change my mind. I'm ready to hear what this person has to say. And I'm ready if I listen carefully and what they're telling me makes sense, to accept that, right? And that requires, just as you said, listening on a much deeper level, much more completely, and with curiosity. So as
And
somebody who's,
empathy.
yeah, right, right.
I will tell people we all have experienced someone not listening to us. We have all experienced maybe not being treated the way that we wanted to be treated, or even not given the benefit of the doubt, right? I can think of one particular example that it was just incredibly painful to present to someone that I care deeply about with evidence that what she believed was not true. And she was not willing to look at it. It's like,
Mm.
nope, I've made my decision. This is what it is. And for a long time, it was so painful to know that someone was not willing to look at what could have changed her perception. But after a while, I became so grateful that I experienced that. Not that I wanted to experience it, not because of the loss of friendship, but because it gave me a sense of empathy for others. And so now the way that I listen to others, the way that I listen to, maybe I have a perception of something that happened, but I want to listen. I want to get all the evidence. I want you to show me everything you want to show me that could change my mind. Like you said, I want to be persuaded. Let me be persuaded until I know I can't, right? And
Yeah,
so I think that if we all have and look back at painful situations, and we can be grateful that that gives us the ability to have compassion for how we treat others, then it's not a loss.
yeah. In all that, the word respect kept coming to my mind. As you're saying, listening to other people, empathizing with them, being where they are in this moment, understanding or trying as best we can to understand what they're going through, respecting what they have to say, and then being willing to change our perspective and outlook. How much bridge building could we have if we all did that consistently?
100%.
Be
Yes.
tremendous. Well, Maria, I think that's a great place to end our discussion. It's been an absolute delight to have you on the Science of Leadership today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing some of a very small bit, but some of your story and your work with us. It's been excellent.
Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing all these topics. I am a fan of the podcast, and I'm going to be listening to all the episodes you have.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.